Now that we've learned about the founding of the colonies in Unit 2, let's move on to Unit 3, the Revolutionary Era, or in the words of that great historian Taylor Swift, we are never ever getting back together. So our first lesson of the unit, Lesson 6, is over the French and Indian War, and our TEKS, our Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, are 4A, that we can analyze how the French and Indian War, the Proclamation of 1763, and mercantilism, which is something we've discussed before, how these caused the colonists to resist British rule, and then 10C, that we can locate important places and regions of the Revolutionary Era. So let's move on. The French and Indian War, which was fought between 1754 and 1763, this was fought in North American soil, but it was actually part of a much larger worldwide war that was fought between Great Britain and France. In the case of North America, they were fighting for control over the Ohio River Valley. This is a triangular area that is formed by the Ohio and Mississippi rivers with the Great Lakes to the north. Well, after this war, the French were defeated and they signed the 1763 Treaty of Paris. And this forced them to give up their North American lands to Britain and Spain. And as a side note, a young officer, Colonel George Washington, fought on the side of the British and became a British war hero. So let's look at the map and see how this war actually affected North America. Now, if you remember before, there were three large nations, Spain, France, and Britain, that held claims on North America, with France claiming this large area, calling it Louisiana, around the Mississippi River. Spain was to the south and the west. The British held the Atlantic coast, and they also claimed parts of Canada. Well, after the French and Indian War and the Treaty of Paris, the British now extend all the way out here, and a lot of what had been French Louisiana was now ceded to Spain, and the British claimed Florida. So quite a change here, and France is out of the picture, at least for now. Now, the colonists who lived along the Appalachians, remember we discussed them along the back country, they were thrilled because now they were ready to move west, to claim new lands, and to expand their frontier. But one of the biggest losers in the French and Indian War were the Indians who sided with the French. Remember that the Indians had been their trading partners in the business of trading and selling furs. So with the loss of the French allies and with British moving on to their lands, this caused the natives along the frontier to rebel and to attack and kill many settlers, which meant that the British had to bring in the army to put down a native rebellion. So let's watch our British soldier marching off to war. And wow, I hope you are as impressed by that animation as I was. And so the British issued the Proclamation of 1763, and this is one of our important terms of this unit, in which they drew a line at the Appalachian Mountains and forbid British settlers to move west of that line. So let's take a look at a map and see what that means. All right, the British now hold North America. They are along let's watch our stop sign moving along there. There's the Proclamation line along the Appalachian. It's another amazing piece of animation. And the British, again, they hold the territory out to the Mississippi River, and they also claim Florida. So the British colonists who lived along this line here were angry because many of them had already planned to move west. Some had even purchased land already. And many of them ignored the law and moved west anyway, which again was going to stir up more trouble from the natives. So the British needed soldiers and forts to be placed along the Proclamation line to keep both the natives to the west and the settlers to the east. But Britain was broke after fighting the 7 Years' War and the French and Indian War. And the question was, how would they pay for the expense of stationing these soldiers? So let's do a little background and actually a little bit of review here. We've mentioned the idea of mercantilism, in which the British used colonies to increase their wealth and power through trade. The British took raw materials such as tobacco, food products, and other things, sugar, and they transported those to Europe. And here, many of them were turned into manufactured goods, which could be sold all over the world, but some of them were shipped to Africa, where they in turn were traded for slaves who were shipped back to the Americas. So this formed the triangular trade, which we did talk about before. One other addition to this was the Navigation Acts of 1651. They required the American colonists to use British ships and to dock at British ports and to limit their trade with other foreign countries. So the idea of this is that even while the colonies are making money and being prosperous in their trade, Britain is always getting a piece of the pie and is always making a profit. However, in the case of these laws, such as the Navigation Acts, both Britain and the colonists often ignored the laws, and this was called salutary neglect. It's another important term that we have. This is sort of the idea that while Britain had these laws, as long as the colonies were making money for them and everything was going fine, they kind of turned a blind eye and they weren't very good about enforcing these laws. But now we have a change in attitude because for 150 years Britain has largely left the colonists to govern themselves, especially in economic matters. And again, that term is salutary neglect. But now Britain needs money. They need to pay up, and they're broke after the war. They need to pay for these soldiers along the Proclamation line, and Parliament, the British legislature, decided that the colonies should start paying their fair share, and that's going to mean taxes. So the era of salutary neglect was over. So let's go to our lesson 6 thoughts. Number 1, how did the French and Indian War change the map of North America? Number 2, how did the American colonists react to the Proclamation of 1763? Number 3, why did the British want colonies and what is this policy called? And number 4, how did the relationship between the colonies and Britain change in 1763? So look over your notes and answer these questions, and then we'll come back with lesson 7 called Trouble Over Taxes, and we'll see you then.